Hello friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today's video will probably please those of you who are interested in just seeing and learning about historic tarot decks. The three decks that I'm focusing on today are all Italian, and I have them presented in order of their appearance. The first one is the Mitelli Tarot from 1660 from Bologna, Italy. It's missing cards 2 through 5 because it's a tarocchino, a briefer game of tarot, whereby having, I think, 62 cards or something like that versus 78. I forget. I should know this, but I'm just not thinking. The second deck is Tarot Neoclassico, which is also known as the Lombardi Tarot. From Milan, the Milan region, and I'll show you on a map. Apologies. The Mitelli comes from Bologna. Okay, so that would be like here. The Tarot Neoclassico would come from Lombardi, which is here. So they're not that far from one another. And then the third deck, the Vacchetta, separated in time from the Mitelli by about 230 years. I think this is like 1890 something. And I don't know where it was actually printed and created, but I do know that Vacchetta himself was from the Piedmont region of Italy. So these three decks, separated by 200 and some years, from the earliest to the oldest, to the newest, are from here, this region of Italy. Now, I've done a few recent tarot videos with other people, and if you follow me, you probably already follow Masha and Musings by Masha and Justin Michael. And I mentioned them in this video because by doing their videos, I was kind of disciplined and forced to come up with decks that I thought were my favorite decks, or decks that I think are really significant. And although I never mentioned the Vacchetta in either of those video chats that I had with Masha or Justin, I thought I'd mention it today and do a little video including it, because I do have 4 copies of the Vacchetta. So how do you have 4 copies of something if you don't like it? So and another thing is sometimes I just like to put decks that don't seem to have anything to do with one another except for being Italian, and to compare them and to see if there's any kind of thread that unites them or influences. And I never really know how my videos will end up going. I don't know what tangents I'll get on, because my videos are not scripted. They're all pretty spontaneous videos, right? So for those of you who are familiar with my videos and you hang out till the end, I appreciate that. And this one, because I'm comparing 3 tarot decks, it'll probably be a longer video. Now, I've proclaimed on both of those channels, Masha's and Justin's, that probably my favorite tarot deck was the Anonymous Tarot of Paris. And I think I like it. I think my affinity is for the Italian decks. And I've said that over and over, that the Italian decks are my favorite. But I think that I have recently developed a real affinity for the Anonymous Tarot of Paris, because it's intact. it's an early deck from, it's probably was created around the same period of time that the Noblet was, circa 1650, 60, something like that. And it's unusual because it's not in the tedium style. And although my videos, are non-scenic pip, focus on non-scenic pip tarot decks, and I use TDM kind of interchangeably, meaning Tarot of Marseille as well as Tarot of Milan or the Italian decks. I think my preference is really in the artwork of the Italians, or those that are not decidedly in the style of the Tarot of Marseille. Now, the Mitelli is probably, neck and neck with the Anonymous Tarot of Paris as far as being a favorite deck. But the reason I believe that the Anonymous Tarot of Paris edges out my affection from the Mitelli is that the Mitelli is, missing cards 2 to 5. It's a tarocchino, right? So it's an abbreviated tarot deck. I forget offhand how many cards there are in the deck, but I think it's, probably like, well, if you 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 4 cards from 4 suits. So minus 16 cards, and I think that's 62. Right? So it's not a full deck of tarot. And so I'm reluctant to use it, especially for clients who expect a tarot reading, with 78 cards. So I can't use it for that purpose. And so I think that's why the Anonymous Tarot of Paris has edged out the Mitelli in my preference for my favorite tarot deck. But if this had 2 through 5 and I could use it, as a tarot deck for divinatory purposes, I think this one would have it. Now, the Mitelli, circa 1660, is very similar in time to the Anonymous Tarot of Paris, and it's also very similar in time to the Noblet, right? Which most of us would consider the very first style in the tradition of the Tarot of Marseille. So it's interesting to see, in Italy, what was coming out of Italy at that time as compared to what was coming out of France. The next deck that I'm including in this video is the Tarot Neoclassico, which is a tarot of Lombardi, out of Milan, Italy, 1810. So it's, 150 years, later than the Mitelli. And then the third deck that I'm comparing is the Vacchetta Tarot. Now, the Vacchetta Tarot, I don't know where it was published, but I do know that Giovanni Vacchetta was from Turin, which is the Piedmont region of Italy. And this is a full, maybe 230 years after the Mitelli. So although it's still an Italian flavor deck, it's separated from the Mitelli by, 230 some years. I think this is like from 1893 or something like that. Now, the publishers of these particular decks are respectively Lo Scarabeo, and Il Meneghello. I also have an Il Meneghello version of the Tarot Neoclassico, but for whatever reason, I chose this one to use for the purpose of the video. Now, let's take a look at the map so we get an idea of the proximity of these decks. The Tarot Neoclassico would be from the Milan region or the Lombardi region. The Vacchetta, if it was done by a man from Turin, would be from the Piedmont region, and then the Mitelli would be from Bologna, which is right about here. So these 3 decks aren't that far apart from one another. The creation. So in a way, you would expect to see some crossover influences, and we'll see. And for purposes of, you'll see later, I do have one card from the Mantegna deck, which we'll get to. Okay, so let's take a look at the first card. That it's not, and actually I have to correct myself, it's not the first card. I don't consider the Fool card to be the first card, but when I do videos, I often have the Fool card first. I truly think of the Fool card as an unnumbered card. He could be this, between any two cards in the series of Triumph cards. He can be at the end and he can be at the beginning. For purposes of convenience, I just always show him at the beginning. But here we have a very dramatic pose on an individual missing a sock. He's kind of a mess. That actually is a balloon. Balloons obviously weren't made out of rubber in 1660, but they were made out of like animal intestines. I'm not exactly sure what this thing is, although it seems to be affected by wind or air. He has a feather in his cap, as we see in frequent depictions of the Fool card, and, clothing in disarray. In the second deck, the Tarot Neoclassico, we see a gentleman accompanied by some type of, animal. I don't know what it is. I can't say it's a dog or a cat. Could be a fox, who knows. He also is in some type of disarray. He's not tidily dressed. Here he appears with a sack, also with a feather in his cap. He's a lot older than this gentleman. And then in the Vacchetta, again, another very dramatic pose, kind of similar in a way to the Mitelli. Again, with a creature. Now, the only one that doesn't have a creature is the Mitelli. But again, as in the Tarot Neoclassico, the animal, it could be, it seems more feline than canine. Again, like messily dressed. The animal isn't pulling his trousers down, but his trousers are down. There is no feather in his hat. Although, and he does, those aren't feathers, but those appear to be like donkey ears or something on his hood. Now here we have a magician card. We would frequently call the magician, but here he's more like a juggler or an entertainer, accompanied by kids, again with a dog. Remember, this is 1660. It's early. So he's associated with music. I guess that's a tambourine, right? So he's associated with noise, making noise. And surrounded by children, playful. Here, the dog does not appear in, the Fool card. It appears in, the entertainer's card. And it's possible that there was confusion and, as decks evolved and tastes, in decks or images in decks happen, sometimes maybe stuff gets lost in translation or somehow the dog became associated with the Fool, because again, this could look like a fool, and it might be that when it migrated to another country, this was seen kind of like as a fool, with a dog and children, who knows? I don't know. This is called La Bagatelle. I'm sure I've butchered that. But I think he's kind of like a traveling salesman, who, again, if we think of the magician in terms of scoundrel, because there is a tradition for him to be like a mountebank, someone that might not be trusted. I mean, you know, traveling salesmen might fall into that category. And here in the Vacchetta, we have a conjurer of some sort, you know, somebody who takes your money or probably makes his living by tricking you and seducing you to play a game whereby you undoubtedly guess the incorrect cone that is hiding the ball that he will, you know, gamble with your perceptions where it might be. Now with the Mitelli, and remember we're in Italy, you know, and it became politically dangerous, I think, at some point, to have specific references to political leaders. And so from 2 to 5, rather than having the female pope, who may or may not have referenced Pope Joan, who would have offended the church, they have instead, you know, 2 men of the cloth, you know, from different parts of the, you know, one Eastern and one Western type of pope, as well as 2 secular leaders from different regions. So this, you know, the Mitelli, 1660, Bologna, and Bologna was always pretty touchy about their about these, you know, these 4 cards. Remember, in 1725, they were replaced completely by the 4 Moors, who were from, you know, not from the Western world. And then with the Tarot Neoclassico, we do have a female pope. She is called that. We have an empress. We have an emperor. And then we have the male pope. So in 1810, Italy, which is in Milan, which is a different region, they didn't have the same pressures as there were in Bologna to be politically correct. We still have the normal array, 2 through 5. And then with the Vacchetta, we have the female pope. She's named as the female pope, and she has what maybe could be seen as the triple tier. And she has the regular, you know, symbols. You know, she has at least the book. We have the female pope. Excuse me, the empress, rather, excuse me. We have the emperor. And then here, instead of having El Papa, we have a word that looks an awful lot like Hierophant, right? Like high priest. So given the time of 1893, this could be an acknowledgement of Vacchetta that he's aware of some of the occult groups or studies referencing this card as a Hierophant. So I think that's kind of interesting. Again, the region of Turin would not have been subject to the same political pressures as Bologna in, you know, eliminating the hierarchy between, or the presence of a female pope and the emperor having, you know, competing for position with the pope. Okay, now we have Cupid for the lover. So it's really more the concept of love. And also notice that in the Mitelli deck, we're not seeing numbers, right? We're not seeing numbers and we're not seeing names. So we have a blindfolded Cupid with a burning heart, his arrows, his bow. In the Tarot Neoclassico, we have a woman who has a choice between two men. And in the Vacchetta, again, we have a Cupid. You know, the concept of love. And let's see, what does that say? It says, sweetness travails. But in all three, there is an appearance of Cupid. And we do see that in most cards, Cupid does make an appearance in this particular card. So in the Mitelli, we have a female in the chariot, and there are no animals drawing the carriage. We do have two birds nearby, but not necessarily drawing the carriage. And we have a similar, well, I guess it's not very similar because here in the front it's open and here in the back it's open. But this one is drawn by horses. But again, just like in the Mitelli, the Vascetta has nothing drawing this carriage. Both of these individuals appear to have some type of wreath on their heads. All three do. So it's some type of victor. Or maybe a virtuous individual. There are no wings, but okay, so here we have Justice. And she has, I believe, the same accoutrement in each picture, the sword and the scale. This is when life gets interesting. In the early decks, the hermit was often depicted as either a hunchback or an individual on crutches. And here he has wings. In some of the early decks, Italian decks, the hermit has an hourglass, associating him with Father Time. And, there might be a suggestion of that with the wings. I mean, because time flies, maybe I'm taking liberties with that understanding. It might also be depicting a virtuous individual, although I'm not sure about that. Here he's more of a monk, a learned individual, a wise individual. But by 1810, even in the Italian deck, it's become a lantern rather than an hourglass. And here there is no hourglass or lantern. And then there's a type of little serpent here. And in the Vacchetta, he really does, look like a hermit, not traveling. He's in his space with a lantern and a book. People come to him rather than he wandering. He takes on a feel that people go seek him out rather than the other way around. And that really is probably the mark of a wise individual. You don't have to go about and shout your name and jump up and down, right? People come to you. People who are intended to find you, find you. So I think that's an interesting depiction. Now we have Fortune's Wheel. So we simply have a woman on a wheel releasing coins, showing maybe generosity, good fortune coming. Perhaps this is a reference to Lady Fortuna, Lady Luck, right? We call her Lady Luck. Fortune's Wheel, we begin to see, you know, a suggestion. Well, this is 1810, so the Tarot of Marseille has been out and influencing, but even though this is an Italian deck and it doesn't always adhere to like TDM imagery, right? We do see a sense of a wheel turning, a creature ascending, someone at the top, someone cranking the wheel, someone at the bottom. And we see something similar, a kind of a blend, right? We have Lady Fortuna with a cornucopia, not a sack, but a cornucopia releasing coins. Here we have either a fox or a dog, and here we have a hare and a fox, like fox hunting the hare. You know, sometimes you're the hunted, and sometimes you're the huntee, and sometimes you're on top, and sometimes you're all washed up and has been. So I'm not really sure why I was compelled to show these three decks, but for whatever reasons, I'm doing it. And as I've said in many of my videos, the only way to really learn is to look at your decks and compare them. And if you don't have the decks, then just take advantage of someone who has them and can show them. Okay, so here we have Strength with a column. A column is often chosen as a strength card or a fortitude card imagery. And there are, you know, stories from antiquity, you know. Certainly a column is a symbol of strength, right? You know, the Parthenon is thousands of years old, but it's still standing due, you know, to the construction of columns. But there are other stories regarding columns. But here the woman is depicted by a column. But a column is a symbol of fortitude, of strength, of perseverance, right? And then here we have, you know, either Hercules or another story of antiquity. I like the lion sticking his tongue out. And again, we have the appearance of a column in a woman and also the appearance of a lion, almost in a nod to like acquiesce to both traditions. Here's another example when things get a little strange. The card that we traditionally think of as the Hanged Man has the same concept. This is called the traitor, but this traitor is meeting a different demise than being hung for treason. Hanging, you know, has been, in this particular style, hanging by the foot, 1 foot, has been a long-standing tradition in Italy as the punishment or the consequence for a crime of, you know, betrayal or treason, something like that, right? And although this is called or is known as the traitor card, it's just a different punishment. I'm not rightly sure I know where this tradition comes from or what it references. But even in modern days, you know, if we think in modern times, within the last 100 years, even Mussolini, after he was killed, his body was displayed like this to show, you know, that he was a traitor. So it is a long-standing Italian tradition. The Vacchetta, however, hangs him by both feet. We all know that card. Now, in the Mitelli, he has a scythe, but he also has an hourglass, which is fascinating, right? Time is running out. We have the pyramid, like time through the ages, right? Time is running out. Here we have, a skeleton with a scythe and a red shroud, which is interesting. And then we have in the Vacchetta a death card that seems familiar, as in TDM, the symbols of different, types of people, right? And their various class distinctions, wealthy, powerful, poor. And then we have a ship coming in or going out, but it looks like it's coming in. Temperance. And in the Tarot Neoclassic, there are 3 pictures, 3 vessels, but only 2 are actively engaged with one another. Now, the devil card in all 3 are pretty cool. Now, I love me a devil that's fire and brimstone. I mean, he's even got a freaking pitchfork, right? This is, to me, visually far superior for my aesthetic tastes to the TDM devil. He's got some kind of serpent here, right? Associating him, with a snake. But what a beautiful devil card. In the Tarot Neoclassico, we have a devil. He's got, I guess, a trident, which is not quite a pitchfork, but kind of, I guess it is. They both have wings, but they're not the wings of virtue. They're wings of things that come out at night, or they operate in darkness, right? And then for the Vacchetta, what a cool representation. This is actually a reference to a cafe in Montmartre, Paris. I think it was destroyed in the 1950s, unfortunately, to put up like a shopping, like a supermarket or something like that. It was called I think it was called the Cafe of Hell. So it was an actual place, that Vacchetta was obviously aware of. I mean, if you look up the Cafe of Hell, Montmartre, Paris, you will see what I'm talking about. So, and it's another example of how, if there hadn't been photographic evidence of this particular cafe, we might not know what reference this was making. This is actually making reference to a place. So if there hadn't been in recent memory photographs, we wouldn't know what it was, unless we found documentation. And okay, I mean, I wasn't alive when this was destroyed. I was born in the 50s, but after this was destroyed. So it's possible that very few people are currently still alive who might have known or been or seen this actual building where this is referencing. And so, if you consider that, the next card, an example, being a tower, could that have been the same story? Was there a particular tower that's being referenced, but that's been lost? Because who knows at this stage? What I love about the Mitelli is that there is no tower for this card. And, and in the Tarot Neoclassico, there isn't even any thunder or lightning or anything like that, right? But in the Mitelli, we do see that the suggestion of the importance of this card isn't so much the tower, but of the lightning, like divine intervention. Now, the reason I love this card, one of the reasons why I love the Mitelli so much, is because it almost seems like this character is saying, may God strike me dead if I'm lying. And so divine punishment, right, is coming because he's getting struck by lightning. So there is like a punishment or a consequence from the heavens. That's how I see this card. And here, it just appears as though they took the concept of a tower and just put it on the card without a story. And if we say, that 1660 is right around the same period of time as the Noblet. The Noblet has a circa date of like 1650-ish, right? And I think, is this circa or is this, no, yeah, this is circa too. So this could be, give or take a few years. The idea, just might have been more about the fire or the divine intervention more than the tower itself. But it is, it is traditionally been called the tower card. So, and in this tower card, it really is like divine vengeance. I mean, this guy is impaled. He not only falls from the tower, but he's impaled. The bolt comes from the heavens, and it splits the building, right? And then the fire comes from within the building. It's fascinating. Now, who does this guy look like? This is the Mitelli star card. But you see, in the Tarot of Marseille, this is the image, more or less, that they use to portray the hermit. Again, an example of when something migrated from one country to another, something got lost in translation. And this guy became the hermit. But this card was representing the star, right? And, and furthermore, we might get the idea that this is where the lantern came for the hermit, right? So we have another beautiful star card. And neither of these cards seem to adhere to Aquarius as a star, the sign of Aquarius, being the star card. But here we have the reference to the astrological sign of Aquarius. Sometimes the female figure pours the water, one into the body of water and the other one on land. But I think either is correct. When I researched, when I went down one of my rabbit holes to figure out why Aquarius was used for a star card in TDM, and I've discussed this in other videos I've done, it's a reference to when the sign of Aquarius or the constellation Aquarius appears in the sky. That's when the rains came in the Middle East, which is where this sign of the zodiac, was originated, right? The depiction, right? So they associate when this constellation appears, that's when the waters come. And so when the waters come, which could be, the jug, this jugs going in the water could show that this is when the rains come. And so the rains are just coming and filling the river. But when one jug maybe, lands, shows that it's coming on land, it might also be showing that the rains are coming and it's time for irrigation. So not only do the rains come, but it's time to take some of that water and irrigate the land, which is what they did, right, off the Nile. And, I'm not partial to the imagery in TDM decks. I don't, I think sometimes they're not very aesthetically pleasing. But this portrayal of Aquarius as the star card, I think is very lovely. We have a moon card, quite different from TDM, a reference to Diana and the hunt, things that happen at night, right? You hunt in the evening. And Diana was the goddess associated with hunt and the moon, of course. And here we have more of a nod to what we consider the TDM style. Again, is this a reference to a particular place that we no longer remember? Is that it? What is this imagery? Is there a certain place, where there were two towers and where lovers maybe went to, look at the moon or to get the best lobster? I don't know, But again, Vacchetta makes the reference to Diana as well for his moon card. The Mitelli, the sun, is represented by Apollo. This is, two young, Prudy, I guess they are, playing in the sun. So again, neither of these are particularly TDM referencing, and neither is the Vacchetta. I think, in my opinion, that the Italian decks really shine in their celestial cards. We have Judgment, which would have been known as the angel. The angel is blowing a horn. So it is referencing an announcement, right? In many, I believe in this region, the angel would have been the last card played. It would have come in sequence of importance after the world card. And although modern day tarot decks are numbered with the world card 21, in some regions, particularly, I'm not sure if it's Bologna or Piedmont, in some regions and in some modern day games, despite the numbering ordered on the cards, the angel card still comes last, and it's still called the angel. In the Tarot Neoclassico, again, we have the angel, figures rising or enveloped in flame. And in the Vacchetta, we have what is more traditionally known to us and brought to us with the angel, making an announcement that it's time, right, to be held accountable. And then we have the world card. Now, in the Italian decks, there are a great variety of how the world card is represented. My least favorite way is the TDM style of, the central figure surrounded by a wreath and then the four evangelists. And I've done a few videos about what this representation is suggesting. But if anybody can make, a central figure in a wreath look nice, the Italians certainly did, and certainly Vacchetta. Of all the representations done in this way, I think this is the most beautiful. But I particularly prefer world cards that don't have a central figure with a wreath. I like alternative world cards. Okay, so moving on to the pips. The Ace of Swords of each suit. The Vacchetta is kind of interesting because it depends on how you read. If you read it this way, it's like, I love war, right? I bring peace, maybe, or I bring peace. But then if you look at it this way, it's like, I bring war, I love peace. So there's ambiguity in the message there, which may or may not have been intentional. I don't know, but I think it's kind of interesting. Now we skip 2 through 5, so I should not look at this one yet. Now we see here in the Tarot Neoclassico, which now we can see in the pips, does seem to cater to a more overall European feel, you know, so that it's not distinctly Italian or French, right? It's more neoclassic. As a matter of fact, I pulled out a deck of cards from when I was a young girl and I lived in Spain. The swords are more like the daggers that you see on Spanish playing cards. Right? And then the Spanish decks, you're missing the 8 and the 9. So I thought I'd mention that and show you the daggers of a Spanish deck. In fact, as we go through the Tarot Neoclassic, we'll see that the other suits seem to be very similar to Spanish playing cards. Quite an elaborate 2 of Swords in the Vacchetta. And 1893 obviously is, you know, earlier than the 1909 deck put out by Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith, right? So, you know, we do see, you know, an illustrated, though not scenic, at least in this particular card, pip. Although the 4, you know, the 4 swords, you know, are not like scimitars where they're curved, they're still non-scenic. But we start to get into scenic territory. Now, of course, the Italians, there is precedence for scenic pip cards in the Italian culture because there was the Solabusca, right? Where each of the pip cards was a scenic thing. I don't know how well publicized the Solabusca had been, like how many people actually really ever saw the Solabusca, since it seems to have been a pretty guarded deck, you know, held by the family. So I don't know how many people publicly saw it, but maybe by this period of time, the Solabusca was surfacing. Certainly, Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith saw it, or more aware of it. So maybe by 1893, there was an awareness of the Solabusca. So maybe that might have triggered the imagination of Vacchetta to also maybe follow suit, so to speak. Okay, so now we're caught up. So I really do hope that Shel David, when he creates his deck, really does include 2 through 5, because I'll be all about that. I'll be all about that deck. In fact, it'll probably be the only deck I ever do readings for until, you know, the joy of it passes. So we have the 6 of Swords from all 3 suits. You know, and here, you know, there's like the, you know, we have a wreath, right? And I can't, I don't read with the Rider-Waite-Smith or the Waite-Coleman-Smith deck. I haven't read with it for a while, but wasn't the Six of Swords like a victor's kind of card? But here it's been done first, right? So it's possible that Pamela Coleman Smith, got her insights for her deck, not only from the Solabusca, but maybe from the Vacchetta deck as well. So I think it's safe to say that the Tarot Neoclassic is just showing, the object in the number. But in the Mitelli from 1660 and the Vacchetta, there seems to be a similarity, a similar flourish. And I thought of it when I was doing the video with Justin Michael. It occurred to me, wow, they the Mitelli, kind of resembles or reminds me of the Vacchetta. Not that the positioning of the cards, are the same. It's just, that there's just a more fanciful tradition here. Look at this. Now, in the Waite-Coleman-Smith deck, we have the three swords piercing the heart, and then the Solabusca, we saw the three of swords in that way. But here we have the Nine of Swords, which kind of makes sense because as the swords progress, maybe they become more dangerous or more stressful. And so it kind of makes sense then that we have 9 swords piercing a heart. It gives it a very distinct interpretation, right? Like the Three of Swords of the Waite-Coleman-Smith deck, it's hard to skirt around the image that you see. And so in this way, the Vacchetta, I don't want to say it traps you to interpret, I think there is more flexibility with this card than there is with the Three of Swords. But it makes more sense if you're going to have that kind of interpretation for it to be an escalated number, right? Rather than just out of the gate, 1, 2, 3, we're in distress. We don't see anything like that in either of the other two decks. Another thing I kind of notice with the Vacchetta is that the majority of the swords seem to be pointed downward. Not all, but the majority. And in this, the 8 of the 10 are pointed downward, as if to say peace is preferred over fighting, right? So here we have the courts, beginning with the Fante, or infantryman, the subordinate, again, the sword is down, like I come in peace. I'm not here to fight. Now, the Tarot Neoclassico, it's interesting because, this individual is leaving us. That's a rarity. We don't see that very often. This one, I wouldn't want to be standing in front of him because it looks like he means business. And again, it's like he brings a message of peace with the sword down. And he's holding the sword too, not even by, I forget the part that's called, but he's holding it by the blade. And again, I think we've reached the point of 54 minutes where if you're still with me, you're a geek. You're a tarot geek. And I thank you for hanging in there with me. The Kings. Again, this king has his sword facing down and he's holding it with his bare hand. Wow. It's kind of an interesting message, I would think. And I might not have thought of that if I had not been comparing these three decks together. You know, how many times I've used the Vacchetta for readings, you know, and not picking up on the direction of the swords. So here we see kind of a interesting thing. You know, we have a definite reference to romance, right? Here it's more like a chalice. Now, I should have mentioned that the Gutenberg was responsible for the printing, which would account, I suppose, for its beauty. And here we have quite a different looking image, right? We have a youth with a pet monkey. Again, we almost have a very distinct, we have a very distinct looking cup. Oh, okay, remember, we skip 2 through 5. So this identifies Giovanni Vacchetta of Turin and the year the deck was made. So we know specifically 1893. So with the Tarot Neoclassic, the tradition of 3 objects for the 3 of Cups, right? But here, we have we have something happening here. I love this little embellishment of the sun and moon and the 4 of Cups. It's a nice embellishment. I think there's a lot going on in the Vacchetta. I think he was probably a deep individual, and I think there are probably many clues to things in the Vacchetta that I'm not picking up on, or, that I don't know. We have 6 for each of these, and we have interesting imagery for the 6 of Cups of the Vacchetta. Again, 7 cups. And the Vacchetta departing from the tradition of 7 objects. And as I said, this is 10 or 20 years earlier than the Waite Coleman Smith deck. There aren't exactly scenes, with people, but there's enough imagery to suggest ideas that the other tradition of 9 cups might not. So I may have screwed up somewhere with the 10. If I already showed the 10, I apologize. I may have made a mistake at some point in the sequence. If you caught it, I'm sorry about that. I'm not going to go back and bury it, not dig it up or anything. Okay, so now we're in the quartz. So it's interesting because in the tradition, and I've pointed this out almost every single time I do a deck review, or I show a deck, and when I get to the Page of Cups, I always comment on it. And here we see a Page of Cups with a cloth in his hand. Now, he doesn't hold a hat in his hand, but a lot of times when we see the Page of Cups is covering the cup with a cloth, Sometimes he's holding a hat in his, anyway, sometimes he's holding a hat in his hand and he's got a wreath on his head. I think that's interesting because, again, this is contemporary to the TDM. So the tradition of a youth with a cloth, although he's not covering the cup. It's interesting. Wow. Now in these 2 decks, we see the departure of the Knight of Cups. It's a rarity. You don't see that very often. And, it's interesting. Sometimes the Suit of Cups is associated with love. And so here we have cloth or a ribbon, which kind of is vaguely, in the shape of a heart. The Queens. It's a real woman of the hearth here, right? She's cooking, she's preparing food, she's offering drink. We see a ram's head in the chair. And we have a king in the Vacchetta who looks like he's been having a pretty good time. The Ace of Batons. We have the cudgel, right? In these early decks, we have the cudgel. Like you're going to get hit in the head. It's almost like a weapon, right? And here it's a more refined baton. Like a jester's baton. A reference to nobility with the crown. And again, we'll skip to the 6 here. Now they're a little crude here, more like sticks than wands, but not as crude as a cudgel. And then we come to the 6. So as early as 1660, you know, if we look at the Mitelli, we see there is like a decorative flair to the Italian deck, you know, that although it's still just six cudgels, there's still something, you know, decorative about it. And here we have an association with music. So this is basic. And this looks like some type of harvest. Again, you know, maybe this was a point of departure for Pamela Coleman Smith with the sense of harvest, right? It might not be the 8 of Batons that she did that with. I think it was the 8 of Coins, but we still see an idea of that. Someone warming his hands by the fire. And it's almost like an ascension. So as early as 1660 in the Italian cards, we do see a reference to illustrative pips. And in 1660, I don't know how aware Mitelli would have been of the Solabusca, which was, you know, a deck that was not for public consumption. It was a private deck. And again, we have reference to music with a pipe organ, but it's like an organ that you pump, right? And I thought, like, where have I seen this before? And it occurred to me, because I look at my decks, because that's how I learn, that there is an image of one in the Mantegna deck, right? This individual is holding this kind of portable organ, which is very interesting. The number 15th card, the number 15 card. So we see, you know, and this deck, this deck of cards, the Mantegna, would have been from the 1400s. So this is an ancient, you know, an old musical instrument that's being referenced by Vacchetta. Sweet sound, or a sweet sound, maybe. Sweet to hear, something like that. And such a beautiful card. So, wow, the Mitelli really is a beautiful deck. And you can see why it's one of my favorite decks, truly. Again, little creatures of the garden. We have the frog. We have the snail. We have 2 snails, 3 snails, maybe more. Again, in the Tarot Neoclassico, a figure facing away from us in the courts. So I have to ask, oh, we have the addition of a dog in the Vacchetta. I have to ask, and maybe you can ask yourselves, which one is your favorite deck of these three? I mean, mine is clearly the Mitelli. Again, walking away from us. So instead of maybe interpreting it as news coming in or information coming in, it's like a need to send information out. Wow, this guy almost looks like a court jester, right? Oh, I'm so sorry. This tripod is in front of me and it's clumsy. But it's the only way I can do the videos is to have it in front so I can hold the cards close so you can see them. And we have one more suit after this, so it'll probably be another 10 or 15 minutes. Again, I appreciate for those few of you who hang out. I know when I see the stats, some people bail out after 10 minutes, but I do appreciate those of you who hang in there. And I hope there's something that it's worth your trouble, because I know time is valuable. And I appreciate it if someone finds anything I do is valuable. So I thank you. And now the last suit, the suit of coins. And the Mitelli. Tarot Neoclassic. And it's interesting, in here we have 3 coins for the ace. Again, since the Mitelli is missing 2 through 5, we skip that suit and that deck until we get there with the other 2. I've read that the Vacchetti, the coins, are in fact actual representations of real historic coins from antiquity. I learned that from when one of my little rabbit holes is to collect coins that appear on tarot decks. And down that rabbit hole, I learned that the Vacchetti coins are all coins from antiquity. And I'm guessing that the coins on the Tarot Neoclassic are actual coins too. A lot of the coins of the tarot decks are actual coins, but these are coins from antiquity. Oh, and here we're up to the 6s, so. So these coins, the Mitelli, have birds. So I really do hope that Shel David does in fact include 2 through 5 for his deck of all the suits, because it will probably supplant the Anonymous Tarot of Paris. But that one will still be pretty close to my favorite. They'll be neck and neck. I just love the date, 1660, for both of them, and being contemporary to the Noblet and not being influenced by the Noblet, by the Tarot Marseille style. Wow, look at this. Wow, look at that. So it's like a negative shape of a shield, or in some ways a casket or a coffin. but I'm guessing a heraldic shield. Okay, we have the 10. And each of these, of the Mitelli, each coin seems to have its own scene, you know, an artist. So these aren't necessarily real coins, you know. But each one of these images, each one of these coins has an image, has a story. And how interesting is that? You know, if you had not seen this video, I mean, would you have picked up on that? I mean, I have this deck, and I don't know how often. Now, why am I missing? I must have screwed up somewhere. I did. I messed up somewhere with the sequence, so I apologize. Oh, here we have that same shape that we saw in the 8. Look at that. That's interesting. So I do apologize because I did screw up somewhere. I somehow got out of sequence. So the valet, or the page of coin, in the Mitelli holds a sack of coins, whereas in the other decks he actually holds a coin. In the Mitelli, he's departing. He's still looking at us, but he's departing. And we don't typically see the Knight of Coin as being in a charging position. That's kind of unusual. Our queens, again, the queen is holding a sack of coins that's dropping. Maybe she's generous. Maybe she's gifting those around her with some money. And the final card is the King of Coin. Again, the king has a sack in the Mitelli. I love the Mitelli. Oh my gosh. How can you not love the Mitelli? So yeah, I think if the deck comes out with cards 2 through 5 for the Mitelli, it's definitely going to be my favorite deck. Totally. And I hope that you have enjoyed this video. I am grateful to you if you've stayed with me all this time. It's a fine time for me to ask for a thumbs up or a share or a like or whatever, since I've probably lost most of you in the first 10 or 15 minutes. But for those of you who have hung out, if you would do that for me, I would greatly appreciate it. Until next time, peace and stay well.